that my life would have become uh, about advocacy, fighting for Americans in this country who have been victims of weaponization of government. We watched a fake, what I like to call Fed napping in Michigan, which was the build up to what we saw take place on that fateful day on January 6, 2021. And what did we learn from all of that? Well, we learned that weaponization runs very, very deep in government. And I feel also that we blinded to it. And our great president, Donald Trump, has removed those blinders. And we have now seen just how bad weaponization is and what it can do to people's lives. Watched over these past 4 years short of a humanitarian crisis. I've seen a lot of suffering. I've seen broken families. I've seen broken men and women. I've seen people lose their life career, their life savings. I've seen people, threatened with lifetime in prison, 20, 22 years in prison, like Enrique Tarrio. My own family was victimized in this, in this takedown of President Trump, where they used Trump supporters to take this president out. Walk out of a very, very bad situation and reunite with their families. We are still waiting for 12 more pardons. We haven't seen those pardons come yet. They're still very grateful for President Trump's consideration. These men, they deserve their pardons. They deserve to be are long overdue. So what do we do now? We continue to shine a bright light on weaponization. J6 is just what opened Pandora's box for us. For Weaponization Watch, going to focus on deep weaponization, where we see very, very corrupt cases out of districts like the Eastern District of New York, where they are housing women and men in jail on bogus conspiracy charges, working with very significant and profound lawyers to shine a bright light there. People need to understand what it actually is. This conspiracy can be, conspiracy is a very dangerous charge. Conspiracy when government doesn't have we need to tell you, learned. Where are they now? You're going to hear from J6ers today. And not just here, you're going to hear from J6ers, probably around town here in DC. We're hoping that friendly and positive media is shedding a light on the massacre, as I like to put it, of these families, of these men and these women. You need to find out and hear from them. And you need to also continue to support these families, continue to support these Sixers. Jobs have been lost, marriages are broken, bank accounts are drained, life savings are lost, careers are gone. And we need to continue supporting these men and women, and we need to continue to help them. So we hope you'll stick around and stay with us today throughout our live stream. And we're very, very happy to have you here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am John Schlafly, here representing Phyllis Schlafly Eagles and the foundation called Eagle Forum Education and Legal, which celebrated its 150th birthday. Now our nation is about to mark its 250th birthday. So that's right. For the first almost 100 years of our country, there was no Department of Justice. The Attorney General during that time was a part-time lawyer who accepted other clients to make ends meet. And how did we get by for almost 100 years without a Department of Justice? Well, it's because there were no federal crimes, literally no federal crimes, until about 150 years ago. Now, how did that happen? It's history that should be familiar to all Americans, but just in a brief nutshell, as the Civil War was drawing to a close, President Lincoln promised to bind up the nation's wounds with malice toward none and charity for all. But his successors had a very different view. They insisted that the defeated states would not be readmitted until they were reconstructed. So we entered upon a period of reconstruction in which Congress, completely controlled by the victorious Union Army, passed the first federal criminal laws, including the first conspiracy laws, one called Conspiracy Against Rights, and created the Department of Justice to enforce those laws and authorized the federal district courts for the first time to hear those cases for the first time in our history. Now, historians say that Reconstruction ended 12 years later when the Republicans and Democrats agreed to settle the disputed presidential election of 1876. But those new criminal laws remained on the books, the Department of Justice remained, and the federal courts remained with the power that they had been given. And so even after all those years, the Department of Justice metastasized and those laws were repurposed. For example, our friend Douglas Mackey, who we'll hear from later in this program, was accused of conspiracy against rights for sharing a tweet written by somebody else on his Twitter feed. He was sentenced to 7 months in prison for that. As another example, President Trump himself was charged with conspiracy against rights for, in effect, endorsing, promoting, and conspiring to break a window at the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, 5 years ago today. And the many defendants who were arrested, charged, and incarcerated were accused of similar crimes, which were originally passed for the purpose of stamping out the Ku Klux Klan after the Civil War, but have been repurposed by ambitious and aggressive and bright attorneys inside the Department of Justice. So we think in Weaponization Watch that much of those efforts were misguided, and while we certainly deeply appreciate the decision of the Justice Department to drop the charges against President Trump and President Trump's pardon of the 1,500 or so defendants who were accused wrongly of the crime of conspiracy in many cases, we think there's more work to be done because we've learned that there are many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of other cases in which the judicial system under the Department of Justice has been abused. We're hoping to see fundamental reform of the Department of Justice, of the laws that authorize bringing nebulous conspiracy charges. Conspiracy is the all-purpose remedy of many ambitious lawyers in the Justice Department because ordinary juries do not understand what a conspiracy is, what it means, and they don't understand that conspiracy charges carry much more severe penalties than the underlying charges would be. So we've got a number of great experts who are going to be with us today to explain the ins and outs of what went wrong with our justice system over the last 150 years and the federal penal system, and to seek a fundamental remedy that starts with the January 6 defendants but doesn't stop there and goes on to other unrelated cases in which the Justice Department has been weaponized against American citizens. Thank you all for joining us here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing what many of our upcoming experts have to say about this important subject. Thank you.
January 6th defendants are having their lives totally destroyed and being treated worse than terrorists and murderers. It's an injustice. There's never been anything like it, in my opinion, in the history of our country. And we're going to have to do something about it, and we will do something. So Paul and Cynthia and everybody, and I say hostages, because that's what you're hostages. What happened here is an injustice, and it should never be allowed to happen again. America will be stronger and greater than ever before. And you know, tonight I'm going to be signing on the J6 hostages pardons to get them out. So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon. Full pardon.
everyone. Welcome. It is the 5th anniversary of January 6th, and a horrible day in the history of patriotic citizens in America. And so much of that day has still not been adjudicated. Certainly not to the length and the measure that God-fearing, patriotic, Constitution-loving Americans demand. And so we're here with a couple of men who were there that day, who's a literal manhunt for patriotic Americans.
Yeah, I think all three of us, we were arrested fairly early on in 2021. So we had a long, 21, right, Jordan? Yeah. So, it was a long 4 years under the Biden administration that we had to endure. And, that was psychologically tough, financially tough. We were fighting the United States of America in court. The full power of the government had been weaponized against Americans like us. And I was entirely peaceful, yet facing 30 years in prison for being there that day. And, it was a novel prosecution that they brought. The Supreme Court found that they wrongfully applied felony charges against us. And we had to fight. We had to defend the Constitution. We had to keep going. And you really find out, what you're made of when you're put through things like that.
Tremendously. There was also this idea that government was staging things. They were literally creating and setting citizens up. Tim, you experienced some of that. What has your life been like in the wake of?
Well, I mean, like everyone else, devastated financially, dragged through the mud. The Mockingbird media has worked hand in hand with the federal government in not only sabotaging the country, but making our lives hell. But yeah, in terms of setting us up, the real fight now, in all these years since my release from prison, is getting the truth out about the fact that the United States government was 100% involved in staging January 6th. It was a psyop, it was a false flag, it was a color revolution. And unfortunately, despite everything we're grateful for from President Trump, we're still fighting the US government to get the truth out, and it's not coming. That's really, I think, the biggest slap in the face, is that after the time that we've served, or the time of our lives that's been stolen, in spite of our loyalty and in spite of our sacrifice as citizens, we still haven't been rewarded with the most important thing. And it's not restitution, though that matters. The most important thing is the truth, and we still don't have it, and that's un-American.
Jordan, we're 5 years later. You hear a lot of people who just want to get on, see all the great things that are happening, which, to your point, Tim, there's good things happening. How do you feel when people say that? I mean, they went after you, destroyed your life, destroyed your future potential. I mean, your name, this January 6th stays with you for the rest of your life. What do you think when people are saying it's time to move on?
We still have to fight, but not forget. We still got a lot of work to do, and we have the right people. Cynthia Hughes fighting for us, and I mean, they tore our lives apart, but we can't let that keep us down. So I got out, I went straight to work, started investing, because I pray to God that the government comes through, but they ruined our lives, so I'm not going to expect them to save it.
You're a father. What is it like for your family, for your children to watch you go through this?
It was definitely quite the experience. I mean, solitary confinement, but even though that was kind of the worst, the not being able to see them for 2 years, not allowed, you know what I mean? Having to see my son lose his baby teeth and grow his big boy teeth through pictures. It's traumatic, but I believe in God and I have strong faith, and he brought me back home.
One thing I think about what you're saying, that government created the problem, so looking to government to be the solution isn't a great idea. What suggestions do you guys have through the experiences you have gained so much knowledge about the judicial system, how it works, how politicians work? What do you think is the solution for a true justice as it pertains to what our government did?
Yeah, unfortunately, when you learn how most politicians work, you learn that they don't work. And we are still looking for accountability. We're waiting for accountability. And if you don't get that accountability when the government is weaponized against the people like that, then eventually it's going to come back. It's going to get much worse. Like, President Trump is not the end of the problem here. He's got a limited amount of time. And if the problem doesn't get corrected, it will come back and it will be much, much worse. And it will go after a lot of other people out there who don't think the government would ever come after them. But the government will find a way to crush their lives because of whatever political or ideological position they take in life, or just because the government wants to flex and wants to intimidate and wants to do shock and awe tactics to change the behavior of the entire society like they did to us. They wanted to use shock and awe and intimidate to try to crush dissent here in America. And we can't have that. We have a Constitution that enshrines our freedom of speech, our freedom of the press, our First Amendment rights, but along the way we also learned that a lot of our other rights are very important. A lot of the rights you don't normally think about, your Fourth Amendment, your Fifth Amendment, your Sixth Amendment, which you may never fully use unless you have to go through a legal battle like we did.
Right.
And those are very important. And we found out that oftentimes the American people aren't looking when the government tries to take those rights away from you, to violate your constitutional rights. And really, I've always believed that January 6th defendants were standing on the front lines of the battle to defend the Constitution. And had we not pushed back, there would have been a lot of our civil liberties that were lost during that period of time. But you have to resist when there's weaponized tyranny coming after your Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, that really takes me to this idea of people. A lot of people just took pleas. They wanted it to be done with. They need to get back to their lives. People have to live with the decisions that they make. Why was it so important for you to not take a plea, to see the full process play out? And how has that affected you now in the aftermath? Your credibility, your ability to speak on these things with authority. What did that mean to you? Why did you choose that instead of taking the plea?
I can't criticize anyone else's decision. I had the luxury of not having a wife or kids. So I mean, my reason is the same message that I have to President Trump, which is that the truth is the most important thing, and I'm willing to fall on a sword for it. I have, there's nothing I would give more as a citizen than my life, and I was willing to sacrifice all of it. And he's right. It doesn't just end with President Trump. This has been going on for years. You go back to the Whitmer thing, but even going back decades before, we had the church committee hearings where they revealed a whole lot about operations our government's involved in. That's kind of what I would recommend. It's just like first thought. Obviously, we're never always going to get to the truth through committee. It's an imperfect system, and frankly, it's a corrupt system. But I'm here. I'm powerless. The only thing we have is our voices. I want the truth, and again, I'm grateful to President Trump, but I would say, President Trump, you're in office right now. You have a unitary authority. You have a plenary power. I would order every single one of these three-letter agencies to audit every officer or federal informant or asset they had deployed there that day and release it to the public, regardless of any reputational damage it might do to the feds. If it causes that much reputation, they deserve it and they shouldn't exist. We deserve the truth more than anything. And President Trump was a victim of this as well. And I believe that President Trump is absolutely within his right to cast these vipers out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would say.
Absolutely. Jordan, anything you would say to President Trump?
Just keep fighting the good fight for us, not the others. That's it.
Well, close us out today.
Yeah, the Bible talks about Esther being in a time in history, a time and place where she had an opportunity to do something that could change the flow of history. And like Tim said, President Trump is in a moment in time where he has an opportunity to change history. And I think in a smaller way, we all do. We can all shape the world around us in a better way. And we're trying to, but President Trump, he does have authority. He's been vested with the power by the people. And a lot can be done that is good in our country with that power. On Inauguration Day, he signed an executive order on the weaponization of government. In that executive order, he ordered the Attorney General to bring accountability to that past misconduct. And he named the January 6th political prisoners in that executive order. But we're still waiting for that accountability. And he also said that the Attorney General needs to recommend remedial actions for the victims of that weaponization, and we're still waiting for that too. So already a year has passed in President Trump's term. I know a lot of people are saying we've got 3 years left, but on the political clock, time flies by very fast. You got midterms coming up, and if we get too far down the road, the weaponization of government will never be checked, will never be corrected, and we have to send a message that this can never be allowed to happen to Americans again.
Amen.
Absolutely. Well, that lands at the feet of Attorney General Pam Bondi and Attorney Todd Blanche to make those moves and do the right thing by the American people. Thank you for being here, for hearing this message today. It's important that we never be quiet and we do not go quietly into the dark and on with our lives, because one day the government will be knocking on your door. Thank you, guys.
Hands in the center.
Hike.
I had the great honor of representing a J6 defendant. His name was President Donald Trump. He had the same courage.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
I had the great honor of representing a J6 defendant. His name was President Donald Trump. He had the same courage. He had the same strength. He had the same faith as everyone in this room, and I saw it firsthand. When he hired me, we were looking at 4 criminal cases, thanks to the oppressiveness of Joe Biden and his corrupt actors in his corrupt Department of Justice. I represented President Trump in the Washington, D.C. case, where, as you may know, they attempted to characterize him as an insurrectionist, as someone who hated the Constitution, as someone, you may have heard those same sentiments against the people in this room. And we knew it was false, and we knew they were lying, and we also knew that we would overcome. Because no amount of oppression can ever defeat faith and courage and prayer. And this room is a living testament to that. That picture of President Trump has special significance for me because we were in New Jersey looking at 4 cases, and we got word that this prosecutor in Atlanta, persecuted, wanted to take his mugshot. And the FBI and the CIA and the Secret Service, they have the president's picture. There was no reason for him to have his mugshot, but this persecutor, and you may have experienced persecutors, I don't know in your experience, but this persecutor wanted him to come down to Atlanta. We don't want you to do that, there's no reason. And finally the president said, I've had enough. I'm gonna go down there and I'm gonna take a picture. And all the nerdy lawyers, myself included, oh, you can't do that, Mr. President. You know, it's the President of the United States. I'm going to do it. And he went down there and he took that photograph. It's iconic. It's beautiful. Most beautiful photograph I've ever seen. And he called me up the next day. He said, what'd you think of it? I said, it's pretty powerful. He said, John, it's going to be more famous than Sinatra's headshot. He was right, because that man was able to take a negative and turn it into a positive, and turn it into a representation of a single man fighting oppression and fighting for our country, which is exactly what you've been doing over the last 5 years. I will say he was with you every step of the way in my conversations with him. He stood side by side with you all. No one can possibly understand what it means to go through the criminal justice system unless you've lived it. No one can understand the fear of separation, the fear of loneliness, the effect on families, the effect of children, the destructiveness of it all. And for what? Because one man, Joe Biden, wanted to crush a movement? Crush a political movement. We have to connect the dots. It started in 2016 It started with Obama spying on Trump's campaign. It went to Russiagate, that fake narrative. It went through the impeachment process. It went right through J6, which was a total setup and an outrage. I saw the photographs. Let me say, I didn't know much about J6 when I got involved. I don't know why the president hired me. I'm just a lawyer from New York City, and I don't work for a big firm. No big firm would take on the case, by the way. No one would do that. So I'm very grateful he did. It was the best thing I've ever done as a lawyer, because I believe being a lawyer is fighting for justice, not using the legal system to oppress and crush people. And that's what Biden did, and that's what your prosecutors were doing. No question about it. But you got to connect the dots. And the dots were focused on one objective by Joe Biden and his corrupt minions, and that was to crush a political movement, a ground roots political movement that sought the best in America. And Joe Biden wanted to crush that from the very top to the very bottom. It didn't matter. And anybody that got in the way would be destroyed. I saw it firsthand. I also felt the oppressiveness of walking into a courtroom in the District of Columbia and what that felt like as an American citizen. The heaviness, the weight. They were there for one reason: to get us, to put us in jail, and to crush us. They thought they could do that. You had these lawyers, many of them Ivy League trained lawyers, former Department of Justice lawyers, in the Department of Justice lawyers. Some of them, I hate to say it, had been colleagues of mine. They had one purpose and one purpose alone: to destroy American citizens that they disagreed with. That was their objective. And you've lived it firsthand. And you've seen it. And it's incredible. And thanks to people like Cynthia, candidly, thank you. Because without you, no, in every dark moment in American history, there's been a beacon of light. And you were that beacon of light. And without your courage and strength, we wouldn't all be here, and the courage and strength of other patriots. Our work is not over. Our mission is not completed. The fight has just begun. They're already talking about coming after us if they win in the next election cycle. Can you believe that? They haven't had enough. They want more.
You're not going to let them, John.
Nobody is. Nobody in this room is going to let them. Absolutely not. We know what their goal is, but we're going to win because our cause is righteous, and our cause is just, and our cause is ordained. All they have is power and the lust for power, and we will defeat that. But our mission is not completed. I also work for an exoneration project in Kansas City. I know firsthand that getting out of jail is just the first step. We have to deal with issues of reintegration, of jobs, of getting licenses back, rebuilding families, rebuilding lives. And that takes a lot of work, and I know, Cynthia, you are dedicated to that, and everybody in this room is dedicated to that. We also have to hold those who oppressed us accountable. I'm sorry. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, but there has to be justice. Those agents who cruelly put you in leg irons for no reason at all, who kept you in jail for months and years without due process, who cruelly attacked the very foundation of humanness, American citizens, They have to be held accountable. But not just those on the front lines. The ones who met secretly in the White House, putting it all together, constructing the narrative, organizing the troops behind the scenes. The ones who are at the center of this oppression must be held accountable as well. And I have every reason to believe that the Department of Justice now, in the hands of folks like Ed Martin, and Attorney General Bond States, will make sure that that happens. We don't seek vengeance, we seek justice. Justice for all, including everybody in this room. And finally, we can't be complacent. We can't give up, we can't stop now. The fight is just beginning. We have to make sure that our voices are heard, and most importantly, we have to make sure that the guarantees of the Constitution, due process, the right to counsel, the right to fair hearing is preserved, because it was denied to all of us every step of the way, and that should never, ever, ever happen again in America. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Smith. I'm a lawyer who challenged the government's use of certain criminal statutes in the January 6 cases. John Schlafly very eloquently referred to the government's use and abuse of some of these statutes earlier, but I'd like to ask you to imagine a scenario, if you will. Suppose protests break out all over the country relating to politics. Thousands of individuals go to the nearest national park, they flood the streets. Some of them engage in vandalism. There's some destruction of property, but the overwhelming majority of them do not destroy property. The overwhelming majority of them engage in nonviolent protest. But imagine that this is the federal government's reaction to the protests. Over 1,500 protesters are arrested, even those who didn't engage in violence. They're arrested from their homes in the middle of the night at gunpoint by FBI SWAT teams for misdemeanor offenses. That is, including offenses including trespass and other nonviolent crimes. Imagine that in response to these protests, the federal government got extremely creative with its use of very old statutes, including some of the Civil War statutes that John Schlafly was referring to earlier. And imagine the federal government said, well, even though obstruction of justice usually involves tampering with evidence or interfering with investigations, we're going to throw all of that out the window and prosecute nonviolent protesters for obstruction of justice for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Imagine prosecutors throughout hundreds of years of court understandings of what obstruction of justice meant. Imagine that all of the judges who are presiding over these thousands of cases went along with that argument, which in ordinary times, law professors in the legal community would scoff at. Imagine in response to these protests, some individuals are charged with assault and face up to 20 years or more in prison for doing such things as touching signs that they're not supposed to touch, and carrying signs over their heads that later crash to the floor without any injury to police officers. Imagine the federal government was using the most intense sentencing enhancements in the book, such as a terrorism enhancement, to put the nonviolent protesters in prison for years or even decades. Imagine that the place where these protesters were prosecuted by the federal government was politically biased against them to the extent that 95% or more of the jury pool probably couldn't be impartial about presiding over their criminal cases. Imagine at the sentencing hearings of these defendants, the prosecutors encouraged judges to add time to the sentence for political statements that the protesters were making. Not statements that encourage other people to commit crimes, not racist statements. Just imagine that the prosecutors were highlighting the political leanings of the defendant in order to get higher sentences. Imagine that if in this scenario, the judges were calling the defendants traitors and treasonous and seditionists, even though those defendants had never been charged with those crimes. Imagine the judges were just assuming that was the case in court and punishing them accordingly. Imagine that evidence in a criminal trial in these cases included video clips of political debates between individuals running for the office of the presidency. That was evidence in a criminal trial. Imagine that world. So when we think about January 6th, it has political overtones. I think a lot of people don't really look at it from a criminal justice angle. They just think about it in terms of the politics. Are they for this politician or are they against him? And what gets lost is the objective facts of how these cases were prosecuted. It's almost not even considered at all. It's a secondary consideration. And I think it's essential when we talk about January 6th and its legacy to try to strip all of that political layer off the cases when we think about whether we want this to happen again. Do we want our prosecutors to be throwing nonviolent protesters in prison for things like trespass? Do we want prosecutors to be creatively interpreting statutes in ways that have never been done before in order to put nonviolent protesters in prison for decades? Do we want our judges to be referring to people as criminals for crimes they're not even charged with in court? And I think the obvious answer for any reasonable person is, of course, we don't want this to happen. So the question becomes, why did it happen? How could so many people in this system make mistakes like this? How could so many judges and prosecutors do things they don't normally do? Because what we saw on the January 6 prosecutions was a moral panic. There have been episodes like this in American history before, appeals and the Supreme Court. The overwhelming lesson of January 6 is to keep politics out of criminal justice. It has to be removed. We can't have prosecutors deciding who to charge based on their political leanings. We can't have prosecutors looking through social media feeds of potential targets for investigations and deciding to charge based on the content of their speech, based on their political beliefs. And if you think that this is an exaggeration, that this is not what they did, you would be mistaken. It is all over the trial transcripts. Pull them, look at them. You will see prosecutors talking about the speech of defendants over and over and over again. Sentencing hearings turned into struggle sessions, where if the defendants did not agree to eat their words, to go back on their support for a political candidate, the idea was the judge would punish them more. It's not American. It should never happen again. And we just have to try to think about this event and these prosecutions without the political overtones on top of them. That's my take home from January 6th. Thank you.
So it's amazing that I'm sitting in this building today, and I'm here for Weaponization Watch. Because the extreme weaponization, for me, started in this very room. It was in 2018. The founder of the Proud Boys, Gavin McInnes, gave a speech here. It was more of a comedy skit than a speech. And walking out those doors, NYPD had allowed the attendees to leave and left the Proud Boys back, including Gavin. outside there was a major protest. Antifa and BLM were outside throwing glass bottles of urine at the attendees. If any of you know my guys don't put up with that. And I think that's the reason why NYPD held them back. We don't let people get assaulted. We don't let people assault us. So peacefully, NYPD, my guys walked out after NYPD let them. They were walking to their cars, and they were followed, and they kept trying to get away from these people that were following them. Well, it resulted in one of those bottles of urine being thrown at one of my guys. The reprisal and the self-defense was immediate. Police came, asked the first party, which was the Proud Boys, "Are you guys okay?" "Yeah, thank you for asking." They asked a member of Antifa that threw the urine bottle, which was on the floor, if he was okay, and he said, "F off, pigs." He left. That was during the peak of the 2018 midterm election when we were, jobs, not mobs, were trending because our jobs number were through the roof and Antifa and BLM were mobbing the streets. The Governor Cuomo came up and decided to make a PR campaign against mobs, not jobs, and they never identified these victims because the victims disappeared. They went through trial with a jury not of their peers, and they were sentenced to 4 years in prison for defending themselves. I want to take a time machine to September 9th of 2016, where all of this started. Hillary Clinton called us, everybody in this room, a basket of deplorables. And although we took it for ourselves, and we put it on t-shirts, we put it on hats, they meant it. They believed that we were deplorable human beings. After that, they started silencing us on social media because they lost an election. They're like, well, we gotta quiet these people down. Well, that didn't work. Then they went for financial platforms, PayPal, Cash App. That didn't work because we're not here for the money. Matter of fact, if you're in this business, people call people grifters all the time. If you're in this business, this isn't a business, okay? You could probably make more money in an office job. We do this for passion. So when they took us off financial platforms, they saw that didn't work because it wasn't about money for us. Then in 2000, what did they do? They locked us in our homes. They shut our businesses down. They said to keep away, 6 foot distancing. We couldn't see our loved ones that went to the hospital. Some of them passed away and we never got to see them again. That didn't work. We had reopen campaigns across the country. Florida was one of the first states to reopen completely, successfully. Then they allowed riots and mayhem to hit the streets in the summer of love of 2020. That's what they called it. You guys remember fiery but peaceful? As the buildings burned behind them, they allowed that to happen. None of that worked. So what did they have to do? The ultimate way to silence the American people. They stole an election. And then they have the audacity to say that the reason that people went into the Capitol was because President Trump was lying about the election and pointed him there. I didn't go to D.C. because President Trump pointed me there. I was going to D.C. because of everything that happened before that. Deplorable, broke, silenced, our businesses destroyed. I didn't get. When the president decided to get up and run again and fight, like this hat says, they saw a huge problem. The president at that very moment had already gone through 2 failed impeachments, 4 criminal indictments. What was next? Because they wanted to put him in prison. They wanted to take him off the ballot. The lawfare continued. Then they tried to assassinate him. Twice. The hat I'm wearing right now has a blood spatter right there to represent how close our country came to chaos. I'm Cuban. My family immigrated here legally. Got to say that before ICE shows up. Legally in the 60s, after the Castro regime, and I'll quote Castro himself, something I rarely do. He said, "My movement isn't about communism. My movement is not about socialism. We're going to create a republic." That's what he said. Took less than 3 months after he took power to side with the Soviets and instill, I'd say, the most oppressive government on the Western Hemisphere. So what I'm seeing, what I saw during those times, and before that, we saw that with Obama, but I do want to focus, is the same thing, the same reason that my grandfather tells me all the time. He's like, man, what did I flee for? You know, it's happening here. It's happening here in drips. It didn't come at the snap of a finger like it did in Cuba. But it's coming in drips, and it's been coming in drips for a very long time. And the only thing that stopped it is this new movement of deplorables, the MAGA movement. I think the most important word in Weaponization Watch is the word watch. It means vigilance. It means looking forward and seeing the obstacles we have in our way. We have less than 3 years, ladies and gentlemen, to turn this ship around. And the weaponization is the biggest threat to our constitutional republic. Since we overthrew the king in 1776, and we created probably the most prosperous and freedom-loving people that the world's ever known. But vigilance is key because we need to be able to stop the weaponization. I will tell you that in a very short amount of time, President Trump is not going to be president. And we have a lot. We currently took the offensive in these January 6 cases, and we became the first January 6ers to sue the federal government. During the Biden administration, it's not Enrique Tarrio versus the United States. It's Enrique Tarrio versus the Biden regime and what they did. Because what they did to my family and what they did to the families and the 1,600 other individuals was atrocious. They made an example out of us, and we need to make an example out of them. And I truly believe that with Weaponization Watch, it will be the forefront, the tip of the spear to end the weaponization of the federal government. Thank you very much, guys.
Hello, I'm Mike Howell, president of the Oversight Project. Today it's 5 years after January 6th. There is going to be a ton of redefining of that day, what it meant, and the lasting importance. And most of it is going to be incorrect. So I want to set the record straight about a bunch of things today so we can properly understand January 6th in the full context, not as the events of an isolated day. First, though, let's talk about that isolated day. We had a rigged election in 2020. Never before in this country's history have we had the election system completely turned upside down, with ballots mailed across the country, collected at all hours with no rules to govern it. No one will ever be able to tell you what the final tallies of that election were. People were furious. They deserve to be furious over that, and still furious today. They had every right to protest that election. In fact, That is the long American tradition of how we test elections for their validity and to build public confidence. We question the system. It is a tradition as old as time. It has happened since the dawn of the Republic from both the left and the right. Well, that was ripped away from Americans as a matter of right in 2020. And of course, people were upset about it. They had every right to exercise their constitutional rights and show up at the Capitol to voice their concerns about a stolen election. Second, we need to understand the fuller context. January 6th is just a day on the calendar. The fight to extinguish the realignment in American politics has been going on for much longer, arguably back to President Trump announcing his candidacy for the presidency in 2015 when he came down the golden escalator. Since that day, there have been plots of various types, magnitude, and that's why you'll see failed politicians like former Vice President Mike Pence, who President Trump picked up out of the garbage pile of the political dustbin, trying to redefine January 6th in a way that tries to undo what can be undone, the realignment of American politics. That is a strand that runs through every hoax concocted against President Trump, the Russiagate scandal, Arctic frost, you name it. And not only President Trump, but his very supporters. And January 6th presented a final opportunity for those who hate this political realignment to use the tools that were asymmetrically in their power to extinguish it once and for all. It is the fulcrum event in the weaponization of government. January 6th gave the cover, both rhetorically, politically, and legally, to justify in their minds the complete and total abuse of our legal systems, of our institutions like media, of our law firm culture, the job culture. Everything you could use to put the screws on somebody was used, justified based upon what was advertised to have happened on January 6th. That is the first chapter of the wide-scale weaponization of government. Everything that happens after January 6th is explained away by being justified because force of law. The FBI, the intelligence agencies, these institutions after 9/11, we as a people made the major trade-off of civil liberties and protections for total power of the states to invest in their surveillance authorities under the guise that they would be deployed against enemies overseas. Those powers were turned inwards and for political purposes over the scapegoats on January 6th. Now, they're also able to get away with this and cause so much damage because the right was willing to let it happen. And many aspects of it are still willing to let it happen today. Many who didn't support the political realignment and a patriotic class of Americans expressing a pretty concrete and simple set of political ideas wanted the January 6th events to be used to set the clock back to the era of Bush politics. This was the thinking amongst all of the political elites, nearly. President Trump was left for dead. Nobody wanted to stand by him. He was denounced by people today that say they're his best friend. You go back to January 7th and 8th and 9th, you can see them one by one finally taking the shot where they thought they had the cover to say what they truly felt. Well, they're back on script now, and that's almost more dangerous than where we were before. Let's look at Capitol Hill. Some of the congressmen that we hold up to be our toughest attack dogs and watchdogs, where were they post-January 6th? Nowhere to be found. In fact, many of them ran away from it. Let's focus on one for a second. Chairman Jim Jordan, a fan favorite of yesteryear of Republican politicians, who chaired, the Judiciary Committee, which then established a so-called Weaponization Committee, but they did no weaponization work. They subpoenaed no one meaningfully. They called no one in. They found nothing new. And they basically used it as a cover to pretend that they were actually indeed doing something about it. Out of that 20 million, they spent probably no more than 4 million. And most of that went to their own internal staff raises and business as usual. They didn't talk about January 6th at all. Now, most politicians, now that the tides have changed and President Trump's back in office, will run back and try to embrace him and pretend that none of that history ever happened. I haven't forgotten that these people did not lift a finger, and you shouldn't either. Because let's be honest, we only have a few years left with President Trump in the White House and where people are ultimately afraid of their shadows when around him. As soon as he leaves, this whole thing could go back to where we started. And our people will be as prone as they were on January 6th and moving forward. And not only those most closely connected to President Trump, but the other victims of ideological weaponization we see in every other fact pattern you can imagine, enemies of the state. Another class that we're going to get into today is the complete and utter failure of what is pompously called the conservative legal movement. There is no such thing as the conservative legal movement. Nothing that gets anywhere close to the equivalent of the left, which is combined with the power of the total state. Instead, that'll exist only in an ever-long paragraph of footnotes about a biography that had no impact on the trajectory of the country. That is what is self-congratulatory called the conservative legal movement. None of these so-called, leaders of that stepped up or lifted a meaningful finger after January 6th, or even for President Trump's own legal defenses. Instead, people were left to empty their bank accounts, mortgage their house over and over again, and suffer immense financial consequences just to find any lawyer that was willing to take that case. Today, we're going to talk about that with some lawyers who did step up. This is, to the extent we can call it, the emergence of a new conservative legal movement. The people who actually believe in what they're doing. Instead of wanting to tend to their own resumes and sinecures, the people who are actually fighting the fight that needs to be fought. That is the weaponization of government and that fundamental asymmetry where you can be crushed if you do not believe in the total state. So I'm joined today by some legends in this regard. Some people who did raise their hands, who fought and who won. Tom, Nick, thank you guys for joining.
Great to be here.
Let me just turn it over to you really quickly. Yep.
We got to change positions.
Yeah. Okay. We're doing a video in between real quick.
Well, very well done. I loved it.
The work has just started in many ways because for the opposition, their motto is weaponization today, weaponization tomorrow, weaponization forever.
What I've witnessed is the full force of a weaponized government, a system that punishes citizens instead of protecting them.
The DOJ uses novel applications of statutes to go after people that it doesn't like under vague conspiracy statutes.
Charge them with forced labor conspiracy.
He was given 300 years for a conspiracy case.
The FBI surrounded my house.
No underlying crime. It's a victimless crime.
With a conspiracy, they don't need any victims.
What they're doing is they're saying, we don't like this group of people. Well, we don't have a statute to prosecute them for it. Let's creatively interpret this thing and put these people in prison.
I could rattle off numerous cases, state and federal level. That should give everyone in this room chills.
I did 3 years in solitary confinement.
Arrested at gunpoint at 7 a.m. with 10 SUVs and helicopters.
I heard the prosecutor on day one manufacture evidence to the jury